Good evening and welcome to The Chase, Zimbabwe's premier current affairs program. I'm Ibn Mabunda and we're broadcasting to you from our ZTN studios in Zimbabwe's capital, Harare. Now, education is an important component in the lives of every Zimbabwean. The basic education cycle takes up to 12 years from primary all the way to secondary education before going into tertiary education. Currently, grade 7 pupils are writing their examinations and the exercise has been flawless so far without much drama. Questions have always been asked though if the grade 7 benchmark is still relevant. In the early 2000s, we had the ZJC examinations taken at Form 2 level and they were stopped. Others are calling for the same to happen to the grade 7 exams. In a few weeks' time, O and A-level examinations will commence. Zimbabwe boasts of a high literacy rate, one of the best in Africa, with a vibrant educational system. Since independence in 1980, the country has made great strides in ensuring access to education, though there is still more needed to make sure everyone across the country has access to basic quality education at a reasonable cost. The education curriculum of 2017 ended last year and currently it is under review towards Vision 2030 for a competitive-based approach to education using the continuous assessment learning activities. However, this has not gone without scrutiny from some sections of Zimbabwe. Today our topic is the state of Zimbabwe's education system. Join me and my guest tonight on The Chase. Welcome back to The Chase, Zimbabwe's premier current affairs program. I'm Ibn Mabunda and we're broadcasting to you from our ZTN studios in Zimbabwe's capital, Harare. Now, I'm joined by Dr. Sifiso Ndlovu, the Chief Executive Officer of the Zimbabwe Teachers Union, ZIMTA. I'm also joined by Charles Mubwandarikwa, the Harare Province Chairperson from the Progressive Teachers Union of Zimbabwe, as well as Taunga Nandoro, the spokesperson for the Ministry of Primary and Secondary Education. Gentlemen, hello and welcome to The Chase.
Thank you.
Thank you and good evening.
Now, note that all views expressed on The Chase are those of our guests and do not reflect the views of Zim Papers 1980 Limited or those of ZTN Prime. To our viewers watching ZTN Prime, please join this discussion via our social media handles at Zim Papers TV Network as well as at ZTN Prime. Your thoughts are important to us. Now, to get the ball rolling, I'll start with a question for Mr. Taunga Nandoro with regards the recent case at Jameson School. Of course, 53 learners had to be hospitalized following a case there that had to do with what is a suspected gas case, or of course it is still a case that is being reviewed and looked at, but what we do know is that 53 learners had to be hospitalized. May you shed more light on this particular case as well as the efforts that have been made from the ministry?
Thank you very much, Evan. You note the issue with Jameson High School was that last week, it must have been on Wednesday, Thursday, there was an emission that affected our learners at Jameson High, which amounted to then 53, and also members of staff and members of the ancillary staff, including even members of the district office who are outside that premises just about 200 to 300 meters away. So this emission started to cause dizziness, shortness of breath, weakness of limbs, and we immediately embarked on our strategies to ensure that they are given medical health care. Working together with the Ministry of Health and Child Care, we ensured that they are hospitalized and they are resuscitated. And let me be clear that it did not affect Jameson High School alone. even the surrounding communities or the houses surrounding Jameson High School were also affected. At this point, we have sent as government the results for the toxicology, for toxicology results to University of Zimbabwe, Midland State University, and including even to South Africa. We have not yet received exactly what the emission was that caused this. So as a measure, the ministry then closed the school temporarily and opened it only for those in examination classes, because there was technical graphics where we're writing their examinations, O-level and A-level. So we closed the school temporarily and made sure that all children go home, and then they were in the comfort of their parents or the custody of their parents. But having received the recommendations, the Honorable Minister, in his wisdom today, decided to visit Jameson High School. So our Minister of Primary and Secondary Education, the Honorable Comrade Torerai Moyo, he was there today, and accompanied also by the Minister of Provincial Affairs and Devolution for Mashonaland West, Comrade Marion Chombo, to assess the situation, including other stakeholders who were there, members of the Civil Protection Unit, members of the ZRP, other stakeholders, members of the DCC, members of the council, the Kadoma Council, and then to give feedback and to appraise the minister as to exactly what had transpired. Now, the Ministry of Health, and through the Civil Protection Unit also, then recommended that it is now safe for us to reopen school for Jameson High School on Monday. So lessons are going to start again on Monday. Borders are expected at the school on Sunday, and this was announced by the Honorable Minister of Primary and Secondary Education, Comrade Torerai Moyo, following the recommendations from the Ministry of Health. But still, we are not yet out of the woods, because we do not know exactly what emission is there, but there are certain measures that we have made to sure that they kick in. We need to wash the linen, wash the curtains, disinfect the whole place actually, because from Ministry of Health's perspective, there could be residues of that emission on to clothing or some other fabric. So we're going to have to make sure that all linen, all curtains, all clothes are refurbished before everybody can actually then continue with class.
You mentioned that schooling will be resuming this coming Monday. Now, you also said that there was no clarity as to the exact cause of this particular incident that we're talking about. How sure are you that without, first of all, solving for the cause, there will not be a recurrence? And should there be a recurrence, what measures have you put in place to ensure that the lives of the students are protected and well taken care of?
Like I mentioned before, remember, this emission or this gas did not necessarily affect only our pupils and our members of staff within the premises of Jameson High School. It also affected surrounding areas within Kadoma CBD. But as a strategy and as a measure, the Ministry of Primary and Secondary Education did not abandon their standard operating procedures for the prevention and management of any influenza-like or communicable diseases such as COVID-19. So we've had them to kick in. So anybody who really feels that they've got a flu-like symptom, they should put on a mask. We're continuing with our disinfection. We're continuing with our sanitizing. We're making sure that the washing of hands is absolutely mandatory in our schools. So our standard operating procedures, the ones that we used during the COVID-19 era, have now been resuscitated.
Very much in place. Now, let's move on to the thrust of the conversation here tonight. It was necessary for us to look at that particular subject just to get an update in terms of the safety of those 53 learners, as well as, of course, as you rightly pointed out, that even members of staff were affected. We would not want to lose any life. One life lost is too many. Now, of course, that would be a positive, that no life was lost, and all the learners and, of course, all the members of staff are being, of course, being looked at under the supervision of the health facilities that we've got in the country. Now, primary school learners, again, I'll start with you on this particular subject. Primary school learners are currently sitting, of course, for their grade 7 examinations. My first question is, what is your assessment of these exams so far, and what's the latest as well as the status of this particular process?
Well, Eden, I am very proud, first of all, to be a Zimbabwean, and then secondly, obviously, to be a member of government and a member of the Ministry of Primary and Secondary Education, because this has been the smoothest start to the grade 7 examinations. We have not had any hitches whatsoever. We have visited certain schools. We have seen the pupils raring to undertake their examinations. And I can guarantee you that this year, the pass rate for grade 7 is going to surpass that of previous years. I think the previous 5 years may be surpassed by the results of this year.
Quite an interesting prediction. Now, let's move to the teachers' side. What is your assessment of how the processes have moved in as far as the grade 7 examinations are actually concerned? I'll start with Mr. Ndlovu.
Thank you very much. To start off with, and when we look at the whole system of education and we only assess it at the tail end of it, that is the examination, would be unfair. It is only fair to observe that our education system is in a state of flux, is in a state of fluidity. We are transitioning to a new system of education which is transformative, which is competence-based, away from the transmissive education system where knowledge was banked. And having said that, then it now speaks to the issues. What are we examining now, and who is examining the learners?
Just to come in there, may you break that down? You spoke of some interesting terms there, transmissive. May you just make it clear in black and white?
When I say transmissive, it means that the role of the teacher was to transmit knowledge. The role of the teacher was to bank knowledge on the learners. The role of the teacher was to retrieve the knowledge at a particular time through an examination. But this time around, the role of the teacher is to transform the mindset. The role of the teacher is to facilitate the skills development. And the role of the examination is to assess the exit capacity of the learners through what we call now competencies that have been gained. This is the thrust and the framework of the education system. So when we're looking at that, then we can now address the issue of the examination. What is the status of the examination? I agree, administratively, it is moving on smoothly, and in the eyes of everybody else, we are happy it is going well. But what are the underlying challenges that we should now address, and publicly so that we can get sufficient support and funding? We must look at to what extent was teacher preparation made in terms of preparing them to meet the challenges that come around with color, continuous assessment of learning areas.
Of course, we will make a conversation around these and other subjects, especially the color. We'll actually deliberate on that particular subject. I would want you to respond, Mr. Mobwandarikwa, on the subject of the grade 7 examinations and how the process has moved thus far.
Thank you. Let me start by saying, going along with what my colleague, Comrade Ndlovu, has said, administratively, the examinations have started very well. And I want to comment that this time around, it looks like all the arrangements that were necessary for an examination of this nature have been done. And this is what we attribute to the smoothness of the examination, like Mr. Ndoro has said. However, there are still some issues that have to be addressed. Quite a number of issues. Some of them are affecting teachers. He has talked about the continuous assessment. We are not looking at the examination which is being written now. It's just a component of the assessment. So there has been a lot of work that has been going on in schools. And this is where our worry as unions, which represent teachers, come from. We feel that the ministry has not done much to ensure that the teachers get down to the other components of the examination as we would have expected.
Right. Still on the subject of grade 7 examinations, we'll get into some of the subjects with regards to the role of the ministry and all of that. Some argue that perhaps this very exam, the grade 7 examination, has lost its relevance and has become an absolute measure of the academic progression of the pupils within our academic institutions. Now, as teachers' representatives on the ground, what is your opinion?
I will say that the grade 7 examinations, they are still very necessary, considering this is the end of the primary school course. There has to be some kind of measure to say, yes, we have a product who is now ready to move on to the next level, that is the secondary level. So the examination is still very relevant. And if we are to look at the competence-based curriculum that we now have, it really is a foundation which is worth to say, yes, we have completed this level and now we are moving on to more skills development, because this is the time when we are supposed to have noted the skill and imparted the skills on the learners, that we direct them towards areas that we see them excelling in or having interest in.
Right. Mr. Ndlovu, may you weigh in on this?
Yes, I want to observe that we are like wine which has been put onto an old bottle. Why? We still have got the compartmental approach to examination, where we're dealing with mathematics, we're dealing with English as a language, dealing with other languages like isiNdebele, Shona, Chishona, Ndau, Kalanga, and many others. We deal with the social science, the agriculture and technical sciences. Then we deal with PE. Then let me zero in onto the physical education. When I look at the paper, it is all theory. But tell me, can I measure the competence of a forward roll in gymnastics by describing it on a piece of paper? That does not show the skill. What we want, can we tell with the balancing of the learners? So I'm talking about, what does physical education then mean? It has to play to the issue of visual arts. And the visual arts, what are we talking about? We're talking about what children have to do. So that component of examination still lacks. So we're going back to the old system. So it's like we're defaulting to the old methodology. And that is where we now must transform and change ourselves to meet the needs of the new curriculum. I think that element of examination is missing. And if I have to go back and get the setters, I would ask them, let's deal with the core issues, the skills, the attitudes, and the attributes we want to measure.
Right, of course, contrasting views coming from the teachers. Now, to the Ministry of Primary and Secondary Education, have you set out to find out from stakeholders or internal discussions on this as to whether the grade 7 examinations are still relevant and whether there are actually any benefits in as far as the pupils are concerned?
Okay, thank you very much for that question. As far back as September 2022, when the previous curriculum ended, the cycle of that curriculum, from 2015 to 2022 in September. After September 2022, we then embarked on what we call a curriculum review process, which has gone on for almost a year, right? At this point, we are now gathering and collecting and analyzing and coding all the feedback that we received from various stakeholders in order that we may have a subsequent curriculum to the one that is currently there. So what my colleagues here are saying, it may be true, but we are going to look at what has all the stakeholders said. What have they said about color? What have they said about grade 7 examinations? That was the opportunity that we gave all Zimbabweans. In fact, there were 2 days in March where we gave all parents and guardians an opportunity to visit the nearest school close to them, whether they have a child at that school or not, and give their feedback on the curriculum. Unfortunately, some of them dwelled mainly on the color, but like Dr. Sifiso is saying, he is talking of the examinations, the grade 7 examinations, and so on and so forth. Others missed that impact because color only contributes about 30% of the final assessment. So the rest of the 70%, we had feedback, but obviously I can't preempt everything that was said up until that report is produced, and that should be in about 3 weeks' time.
Now, time for us to take a quick breather. We'll be back shortly after this break.
Following the story.
What is happening on Zimbabwe's roads? How did we get here? Through red robots, basically break every road rule under the sun.
So inini ndakadhakwa nembanje dzangu ndikaenda kuchipatara ndaunorapwa kana handibatsiri asi ndikazvishaya teteka aiwa.
Deeper analysis.
So, are you ready and prepared if violence rears up?
Jacob Mafume's party has taken hostage of them.
The videos are there.
Do not be drawn into the debate of discussing issues that are sub judice. He said when he grows up, he would like to be like me.
Good evening and welcome to the program.
Just to break the ice, what is ZINEF's mandate?
To promote media freedom.
And money matters.
Coming up, Tanganda Limited is set to bring online a macadamia processing plant.
Now, Zimbabwe Stock Exchange listed company Seedco Limited has resolved to suspend indefinitely its proposal.
Every week on ZTN Prime.
You are watching The Chase on ZTN Prime, and we're broadcasting to you from our ZTN studios in Zimbabwe's capital, Harare. We are discussing the state of education in Zimbabwe with quite a verbose panel in this very conversation. Now, as follow-up to an earlier subject before we took the break, the ministry can do so much at a policy level to, of course, the educators and implementation, but I am also sure when it comes to the enforcement, teachers perhaps do the bulk of the work in that particular regard. Of course, parents do come in as well. Now, as teachers, where are we losing this war and where are the wheels coming off?
Okay, I may start and say the greatest challenge that we had with the competence-based curriculum was that we are not against it. there are very good points coming out of it, and if it is done properly, we think we can get somewhere as a nation. But our challenge comes with the implementation. And we thought that the ministry should have consulted teachers to begin with extensively, so that we would come up with a roadmap on how we were going to start implementing the competence-based curriculum. Our own thinking was that perhaps we should have started at ECDA. We take a full year training the teachers so that it would be easy for them to start teaching. Then the following year, when the ECDAs are enrolled, they are taught by trained teachers. Then that year would be teaching the ECDA and training ECDB teachers, and move on with that group until they get to grade 7. The teachers would have sufficient training, and we wouldn't have much of the problems that we currently have, because it was started on different levels. We had some starting on ECDA, others starting at grade 1, some starting at grade 3, and Form 1, Form 3, and so on. That was problematic. Then this curriculum is capital intensive. A lot of funding is needed. Right. This brings us to where the ministry should come in, and they should have ensured that we had proper funding so that we can do these things right.
Right, I'm picking some sentiments that are color directed. To you, Mr. Sfiso Ndlovu, where this subject is concerned, where do you think the mark is being missed, if at all?
Yes, I would like to start from a position where we are saying the teacher is the most important component in the implementation process. You can print as many textbooks as possible, but as long as the teacher is not properly prepared, then we are losing it. We lost it at a time when we did not put the component. Remember, it was part of the framework: teacher professional development, continuous development. So we needed, therefore, to continuously train teachers, equip them, because we are losing teachers and replacing them. So that training must be continuous. But what kind of training? It is the training that should use methodology which will be effective. The current methodology was the cascading model. Cascading model means you are training a few people at the top to train below and go on. By the time you reach the lowest level, the material that is going there is diluted. But then the records that are coming up will tell you that we have had an outreach of 40,000 teachers or 70,000 teachers. But what is the quality of the output is very important. So teachers, therefore, we learned more about the policies in education more than the delivery of that framework. That, to me, was a missing element in the implementation. And that is where the disconnect that we found in this current thing. So as we review it, these are some of the things that we should then iron out, polish them up, and make them good so that we pick up our pieces and move on.
Right. We will come back to the subject of colour a little bit later. But there is a concerning situation within our education system where it is that we are seeing the rise of drug as well as substance abuse, sex parties, and all of these concerning and very much worrying reports. Now, the question to Mr. Taongana Ndoro is, are our teachers adequately equipped to deal with these challenges, and what is being done from a ministry perspective to address as well as to curtail the rise in as far as some of these cases, strange cases, I'll put it across that way?
Okay, thank you very much for that very important question. You will notice that what we are seeing about these cases of indiscipline and drug and substance abuse they are not a cause, they are effects. And when I talk of effects, I'm talking of the recent past, where we're talking of the period where we had schools closed for a very prolonged period of time, almost 9 months, during the COVID era. That took away the social safety protection of our children from societal ills. We had children going for 9 months to a year in communities where they are exposed to drugs, sex, substance abuse, and everything else. Then we had to bring them back into school after the COVID era. So these are the unintended consequences of COVID. You see, the direct consequences of COVID were that either you get COVID and you die, or you have to get vaccinated. And so it looked like a health issue. But there were societal issues that we missed. And these are the consequences. These are the effects of us having to have schools closed for almost a year. Then you get someone who had now become an artisanal miner during the time that schools were closed and exposed to drugs and substances that are intoxicating. You had a girl child who was confined to premises where they are exposed to those of the opposite sex until they become so idle, they have nothing to do except to indulge. That was the unintended consequence of COVID. There's really nobody to blame here. But what we can do as a ministry, and what we are doing, is we are now taking corrective measures. We now have robust guidance and counseling policies. Every school has got a guidance and counseling on its timetable every single week. We have even trained some of our teachers that this guidance and counseling should start not only at school assemblies, where the headmaster speaks to them, but also when the teacher is marking the register. And then realize, after marking the register, before you say, open page 8 of our mathematics ventures book, you start to talk about the ills of drug and substance abuse. You start to talk about the ills of unwanted pregnancies, early indulgence in sex. So we are working hand in glove with members of these unions to make sure that we can at least save a generation. There is that other generation that we will consider that, well, this is the most affected generation. We call them the COVID generation, the ones that were affected when they were most vulnerable. These are the effects. They're not the causes.
Right. To the educators here, may you weigh in on the subject, and what do you think would be the remedy or the panacea to this situation that we have got, and what is your stance in terms of, the sentiment that says we could be seeing the results of the pandemic being reflected in our pupils?
Yeah. Today's society is facing challenges which were not imagined in the past. And to respond to those challenges, you will need a mindset transformation, a mindset that will respond to the changes in the current environment. And this lays itself in education as well. This is where we talk about, in the education discourse these days, a global citizenship education, which prepares the learners to live peacefully in their environment, live sustainably with their environment, and also adopt consumption patterns that are sustainable to their health, sustainable to their environment, sustainable to the economy. This kind of education mindset and transformation is important. So we missed it in the past in estimating that. So now this is what we are introducing to say this new generation needs to be equipped with that mindset which can help them interface with the changing circumstances they find themselves in. Unless we empower them that way, we will remain a society that is in dire straits and crying out loud. So we are talking about education which must respond to those mindsets.
Mr. Charles.
Yes, as a teacher, I would also say that teachers play a very important role. So it is imperative that government must make sure that the teacher is empowered. At the moment, we cannot rule out a situation where we have demotivated educators who should be playing a critical role in society. I'm not saying we are neglecting our duties, but if we are to honestly look at the drug abuse program and indiscipline in schools, you will see that some of the causes go beyond the school. For example, the breakdown of the family unit. It's very important. We now have parents who have to look for a livelihood, and sometimes the children are abandoned and they are exposed to different things. It's now different from when we grew up. A child belonged to the community, and that has broken down completely. And the circumstances of the teacher, you know, back then teachers had a very influential position in society. Now teachers are looked down upon, and if we are to stand up and say anything, nobody respects, because who is going to listen to someone? A child cannot listen to you when you are renting at their place, and sometimes you are called by the parent to ask you for late rent, something like that. So whilst that is not, I am not saying it's the only reason why we are having this, but we need to look this as a society and then try to have functioning communities, organized communities whereby we are all responsible, because these things are not happening in a vacuum. They are happening in the open, and I should like to think that the whole community is aware of who is doing what. So if we start from there, and I think Dr. Ndlovu put it quite well when he said a mindset shift is what is needed for us to be able to tackle this issue.
Right. We take it to Mr. Ndoro with regards the subject of technologies. Of course, we'll make reference back to the issue of the welfare of the teachers a little bit later. Now, can you speak to the stance of the ministry in terms of ensuring that there are adequate technologies? We are seeing that technology has changed the way of life by and large. And from an education perspective, what efforts have you put in place to ensure that the adoption of technologies is a smooth sailing?
Earlier on, I spoke about the incident at Jameson High School. During the time and the week that Jameson High School was closed, do not think for a second that education had stopped or that learning had stopped. We used technologies, online and distance learning, which we embraced during the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, which we now regurgitated. So our pupils were at home, but they were receiving work. Teachers were at the school, making sure that they send work through technology, and then they would actually revise and mark that work during the week that Jameson High School was closed. So this is just one example of the strategies that we have put in place as a ministry. We have said, let's make sure that each and every school has got electricity. Each and every school has got connectivity. Therefore, as the Ministry of Primary and Secondary Education, we are working as the whole of government. Ministry of ICT is there. Ministry of Energy and Power Development is there. Ministry of Local Government is there to give us land for solar farms. So we put all that together and we make sure that the school is electrified, it's connected to the internet, and we can use all technologies once you get to the school. In fact, the thrust is that we want to make sure that each of our 10,517 schools across the whole of Zimbabwe become very prominent business centers for their communities. If someone within the community wants to connect to the internet, they should be able to go to the nearest school. If someone within the community would like to purchase, because schools are also into commercial ventures, if they would like to purchase tomatoes, vegetables, chickens, relish, maize meal, they go to the nearest school and they are provided with that. So we're transforming our education by making the school centers business centers that have embraced technology, that have embraced agriculture, and that have embraced an economic environment for not just for them, but also for the community.
Right. To the educators, let's talk about the role of color against the context of the new technologies that we are receiving and of course that are coming online every single year. Let's talk about the effectiveness thereof of the continuous assessment learning in that particular regard and what your sentiment is from an educator's perspective. I'll start with Mr. Mubwandarikwa.
Yes. Okay, thank you. The issue of continuous assessment, like we have highlighted earlier on, is capital intensive to begin with. But I think for the primary, even at secondary level, I think we have too many colors, considering that it only takes about, or it constitutes only 30% of the total mark. For a primary learner who is in grade 7 to have 5 components of color per learning areas, where we have 6 learning areas, I think it's just too much. It's just unnecessary in our view. A learner ending up with 30 colors, this is why you are hearing the outcry from both the parents, the learners, and the teachers. And the teachers are taking part without much of appreciation in terms of remuneration. There's no extra remuneration. This is something that has come into the system, increasing the workload. So there is a legitimate expectation that when the workload is increased, naturally the reward should also come along like that. But the major point that we should highlight is that we have too many colors. 30 components for a grade 7 learner is no joke.
Well, some parents have said that color is now compensatory homework for the parents throughout their education exercise, or should I say discourse. Now, let's talk about the aspect of whether this education system is relevant or not. What is your perspective, Sfiso?
Yes, first of all, let's just put a clear rider. Continuous assessment of learning areas is a good concept. It needs to be tweaked so that it can respond to the needs of the curriculum.
Right.
What are the needs? Wandariko has already said the issue of overloading the projects on the learners, the teachers. It's just going for an overkill, and eventually you spend most of your time working on that. And there's therefore a tendency or a high temptation to cheat. And I was marking, as I moved around town, posters, billboards showing people advertising that come with 2 colors. And I was saying, who is now being subcontracted? Colors are commercialized. So what are the teachers marking? They are marking a project that was designed in Mbare, manufactured, done in Mbare. But what skills did the teacher really look at and have input to develop on the learner? Nothing at all, except to bring you a completed product. Then you wonderfully say, oh, this is a good project. That is against the concept of color. Because we want to develop those skills, those technicalities, those competencies in learners, which will contribute towards an industrialization or industrial revolution that we are into. Because they must create, there must be some imagination, some intellectual stimulation which comes into the mind of the learner. And then when the learner is done that way, then they can produce a product which responds to the needs of society.
Now, just to jump in there, earlier on you gave an illustration of the Olympians, or should I say those acrobats within that field. And you gave the illustration of how there is the practical aspect and the examination, which is theoretical. So is color perhaps not an attempt to ensure that the learner has that practical, aspect of the education system according to your illustration?
Yes, there is always that component of marrying theory and practice so that we can produce new knowledge. So that must be married. And in the production, it must stimulate growth. Remember, the intercourse between the teacher and the learner is not just for them to produce the same thing that teacher has said, but is to refine it and produce new knowledge. And that is the idea where we have put a socio-intellectual reproduction system in the education system, where we develop new ideas and new answers to the problem. That's color for you. But then, these were the problem that we saw. Too many colors and compartmentalized. Again, defaulting to the old system. Because when I checked in some schools when we did a survey, the colors, there was color for term 1, color for term 2, color for term 3. Then I said, what does that mean? You have 3 colors in a component, in one component, and this says 6 components. In one school, I saw 9 components, learning areas, and the children made 27 colors. I said, at what time did they do all this? And when did the teacher mark this? Everybody is now drained, exhausted, and angry, despondent. Hence the focus on color. And hence the error of judgment in the review, where we had to judge the curriculum based on color instead of looking at it as a whole. And for teachers, if I may come in just before you stop me, I can see you wanted to stop me. But for teachers, then there's a problem. Because we did not train them sufficiently or prepare them sufficiently, they had a problem of how to design a color, design a system for going that way. Then there was also the problem of moderating what was supposed to go into the moderation and what is supposed to go into marking. Remember, the same teacher who is teaching the child must now contribute to marking in such a manner that he contributes to the certification of the child at the end of the grade 7. So if those elements are not attended to, they create a problem.
Right. Of course, I'm sure you're eager to respond to what has been said by the educators.
On the contrary, I have spoken extensively about government's position on color. And at this point, I'm not going to preempt what is in the report that is actually being coded right now, which is being analyzed right now, which is coming out within the next 3 weeks. So it would really confuse everybody else. So our position as the ministry and as government is that we are waiting for that report. Once that report about all these issues, I'm sure all the issues that they're talking about, they talked about them during the curriculum review process. So they must be captured or must have been captured in our report. So when we get the report, and as the Honorable Minister has promised today, that whatever comes out in the report is what we are going to go with. If the stakeholders have said the components are too many, let's reduce them, that's what we'll go with. If the stakeholders say, can you shelve color a bit, we'll shelve it. So we're waiting for that report. So therefore, I cannot comment much on that because we're expecting the results of that report in about 3 weeks' time.
Now, very quickly, were you satisfied by the participation of the stakeholders in that review process?
Oh, the participation was over the charts. I will be the first to admit that when we introduced the continuous assessment learning activities, we had not really consulted teachers, pupils, parents. We had consulted a bit, even teachers. So, but this review process, we decided that no, we might have erred. Let us correct the coming curricula by extensively consulting all stakeholders. We're talking of teachers' unions, we're talking of security forces, we're talking of accountants, we're talking of lawyers, we're talking of bankers. We consulted almost every facet of industry in this curriculum review process. That's why it has taken almost a year just to review the process, because we would go from province to province to province to province, getting their feedback, and now it will take them quite some time to collect that information and then come up with the proper report.
Now, of course, we will be looking into this particular subject here on The Chase to find out what would have been the outcome, of course, of that review process. And we do hope that we'll have this very panel as well to break down some of the outcomes of that particular report. Yes. Now, Mr. Ndlovu, your union has long complained about the working conditions of your members in Zimbabwe, with complaints based principally around salaries and non-monetary benefits. The same as well with your organization, Charles, the PTUZ. Now, how have been your engagements with the employer? And secondly, do you think the prevailing situation in schools we have talked about before, like the rise in the drug abuse, as well as some of the cases that we're seeing beginning to rise, are a direct result of the working conditions that we are seeing? Mr. Ndlovu.
Zimbabwe is a very lucky state, it's a very lucky country. Why? It has been endowed with so many dedicated practicing teachers who have continued to raise the flag of education in Africa to greater heights. That we are not apologizing about. We have the breaking rights as teachers. And the Ministry of Education has been working with us on that aspect, when we have been approaching them to address sector-specific issues that we have to deal with remuneration, particularly the allowances for the teachers who have special responsibilities. And that is something that we expect them to assist us with. So the employer, on one hand, which is the Public Service Commission, we have engaged them through the National Joint Negotiating Council to address the levels of remuneration. And the current bone of contention is to ensure that the dollar allowances that are there are converted into a salary which can be part of pensionable emoluments, which can contribute to the future earnings of the teachers. And that is one area. But the quantum as well should be increased. And we have been giving them the indicators that as we move towards the Agenda 2030, and for Zimbabweans to be an upper middle class society, the teachers are already in the middle class and they reflect that. Their current salaries should be working towards that. And that has been our major argument. And we continue to ramp that lobbying around that area.
Right. Now, we are coming towards the close of our program. We'd want to hear from the ministry in terms of the overall bird's eye view in terms of, the state of learning in the country and the efforts that you are making to address the issues that are being here presented, not just, of course, by the educators, but also even by the parents and even some of the concerns from the pupils themselves. I think we've spoken much about the teachers, we've spoken much about the parents, and we did not speak as much about the pupils. But we want to hear your perspective, Mr. Ndoro, with regards what the Ministry of Primary and Secondary Education is doing to address the needs, the requirements of the learners, as well as to ensure that the state and the quality of education in Zimbabwe is improved.
Yes, thank you. The ministry is seized with a cocktail of strategies to ensure that our pupils receive relevant, quality, inclusive, and equitable education. And obviously, the issue of conditions of service of teachers has been something that we have continuously lobbied for. As Dr. Ndlovu said, that the employer is the Public Service Commission. We lobby to the Ministry of Labour, Public Service and Social Welfare, riding with them together to say, these are the conditions of the teachers. Can these teachers be remunerated better in these aspects? Government has sat down. It has looked at some non-monetary benefits. I am sure my brother Charles here will be aware that there are certain pieces of land that have been identified in Harare where government is going to construct teachers' houses for their benefit because they are teachers. And the predecessor in the Ministry of Primary Education, the Honorable Minister Dr. Evelyn Ndlovu, managed to push forward an allowance, which is called a teaching allowance of USA $80. We have got the rebate, car import rebate. Teachers are the ones that most of the vehicles that you see being imported at Chirundo, Beitbridge, Plumtree are teachers' vehicles because they have got a rebate. And these are non-monetary benefits that the government has been making strides to ensure that we improve the conditions of service of teachers. Now, because a motivated teacher means that we then receive quality education to our children.
Right. Now, another key subject, parents are always mentioning the aspect of the extra lessons across the country. Would want to hear from the PTUZ to say, are these justified? And is that not an extra burden that is now being, raised by the teachers and being shoved in the way of the parents in the face of the macroeconomic conditions that we've got in the country?
From the PTUZ perspective, we want to believe that if the welfare of the teacher issue is addressed, all these other problems will fall away because the teachers are not getting as much as they would have wanted. I'll give myself as an example. When I started work in 1991 as a teacher back then was receiving a salary which was 15 times the PDL at that particular time. So if you were a teacher, yes, over the poverty datum line. So if you were a teacher, this is why teachers back then were respected in societies. They were nowhere near poverty. And I remember back then we used to conduct these extra lessons, especially if you had examination classes. The only difference with today is that they were not paid for because there wasn't any need for a teacher to ask for anything more than what they were getting because they were paid adequately. Now what I see as having happened is that during that GNU era, teachers were receiving incentives and the salary and the expectations of teachers got to a certain level. Then at some point, the salaries were cut to almost nothing. And we then saw this crisis rising. Some of the teachers are actually asked by parents because if you are going to go to work and then teach from or just following the timetable, the time, parents are observing that their learners or their children want a little bit more. So they end up asking the teacher to come in and help as an extra arrangement. And from our perspective, we think we see doctors having surgery after attending to public hospitals, and we view these because they are done outside the prescribed.
Right, we are coming to the conclusion of our program. Now, we've got O and A-level exams coming soon. What is the level of preparedness and as far as your ministry is actually concerned in just 1 minute?
Yes, the level of preparedness for O and A-level examinations is extremely high. Security measures are so high, and even the laws are being put in place to make sure that if there is anybody who's going to have any pre-access to our O or A-level examination, there are going to be very deterrent measures. In fact, the clarion call is that whenever you see or you have pre-access to an examination paper, just flee. Flee because you will not be able to be free.
Right.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, we've come to the close of our program. I'd like to thank my guest, Dr. Sifiso Ndlovu, the Chief Executive Officer of the Zimbabwe Teachers Union, Charles Mumbwandarikwa, Chairperson of the Harare Province from the Progressive Teachers Union of Zimbabwe, Mr. Taungana Ndoro, Spokesperson for the Ministry of Primary and Secondary Education. Do follow us, of course, on our social media handles at Zimpapers TV Network as well as at ZTN Prime. Thank you for watching. I'm Eben Mabunda. Have a good evening.